what are the main causes of cancer? As it seems like you hear about it more and more recently that so many people are getting cancer or the early stages of cancer. What are the main causes of cancer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that we've always been trying to deal with. And sometimes some people say, well, we don't know what causes cancer. That's sort of a cop out because we actually do know a lot about what causes cancer. And these are things that cause cancer are called carcinogens. And the World Health Organization maintains a huge list of these carcinogens. But if you want to break it down into what causes cancer in most people, you can look at the sort of a couple of studies have looked at the sort of percentage contribution of these carcinogens to cancer. And the biggest one, of course, is tobacco smoke. So that's sort of by far and away the biggest contributor to cancer at around 35%. And these estimates were from 2015. So it was higher before when more people are smoking, but as a contributor to a cancer, it's the biggest. Interestingly, the second biggest and almost as big is actually our diet. So it's a huge, huge part of what contributes to cancer in general, and far outstrips. So those two are way above any other causes of cancer. So when you worry about things such as radiation or, chemicals, sunscreens and pesticides and stuff like that, they do cause cancer, but the contribution in a whole population is very small. So what's interesting about diet is that we know this from our studies, but what part of the diet actually contributes to cancer? And that's where things sort of bogged down a lot. So initially in the 70s, people talked about fiber. So people thought about, oh, hey, well, maybe if you eat a lot of fiber, what you're going to do is have a lot of big bowel movements, and that's going to clean out your bowel and you're not going to get cancer. Turns out that wasn't true. Then the next thought was, hey, maybe it's dietary fat. So if you remember the 80s and 90s, there's this huge movement against fat that, all fat is bad for you. It caused heart disease and all this sort of stuff, much of which has sort of been, overturned at this point. But there's this thought, maybe it causes cancer too. Turns out that wasn't true either. Then people talked about vitamins. So maybe cancer is like a vitamin deficiency. So we did many, many studies, millions of dollars, decades of research, where we would randomize people to, say, one group that took a certain vitamin and one group that didn't, and see if there's any difference in cancer. So we tested vitamin A, didn't work. Vitamin B didn't work. Folic acid didn't work. Vitamin C didn't work. Vitamin D didn't work. Vitamin E didn't work. Selenium didn't work. Omega-3 fatty acids didn't work. So all of those supplements didn't actually make any difference to the incidence of cancer. So we were sort of stuck at that point in the mid 2000s saying, oh, it's the diet, but what part of the diet? And that's when it became sort of more and more clear that this cancer is actually an obesity-related disease. So what happened, of course, is that in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, people didn't really think about it, but then we had this obesity epidemic, so it became a bigger and bigger problem. So obesity in 2003, when they started to look at the studies, that was the first really definitive studies that said, hey, obesity is actually a huge risk factor, as well as type 2 diabetes. And both of those conditions will actually increase your risk of certain types of cancer a lot. So it really depends on what type of cancer you're talking. Like if you're talking lung cancer, obesity plays almost no role in it, right? That's smoking. Or if you have asbestos, which causes mesothelioma, which is a cancer of the lining of the lung, again, obesity plays no role. But things like breast cancer and colorectal cancer, which are sort of really important cancers, they actually are obesity-related cancers. So that was the sort of big link. And to this, at this point, the World Health Organization considers 13 different types of cancer as obesity-related cancers, which is huge because from 2003, we didn't even know. Like when I went to medical school, Nobody thought obesity caused cancer.
Really?
It's almost as big as smoking. It's a huge, huge thing. So therefore, if you know that, that's super powerful, because if you can maintain a normal weight, you're going to reduce, just like stopping smoking, right? You're going to reduce your risk of these types of cancer.
But aren't there a lot of healthy people out there or non-obese people that also get cancer?
Oh, absolutely, because there's a lot of different things that go on, and that's what I spend the first half of the book talking about, is how the sort of cancers develop. So it's not just about obesity, just like you can smoke forever and not get lung cancer, but it raises your risk. So same as
what are the other factors? If there's people out there that are super healthy, they're working out, they're eating well, but then they get cancer. They're under 15% body fat, 12% body fat. What are those other factors of people getting cancer? Main
actually,
factors.
the rest of it we actually know very little about. So we need to know more about those, because certain things, so smoking and diet are probably your biggest factors. And then there's like 100 different other risk factors for cancer. These are the other carcinogens that we talk about. But also things such as, background radiation and sun exposure, like if you get too much sun, for example. So there's all sorts of other things, and genetics plays a role. But one of the big mistakes I think we made is that we focus so much on the genetics part of it, thinking that, well, this is sort of a random mutation that causes cancer, not sort of, which puts the onus on sort of this random luck idea that it's just bad luck.
My parents had this, my grandparents had this gene, so I have this, I'm going to get cancer.
Yeah, exactly. And some people think that that's sort of a death sentence. Like if you take BRCA, which is a certain type of gene, for example. So this is the gene that Angelina Jolie, for example, got diagnosed with. Her mom had cancer, I think, or, an aunt had cancer. So she got tested and she had the gene. And people think, well, for sure you're going to get, cancer. But it turns out that if you look at the incidence of cancer, if you have BRCA, if you have that gene, in the 30s and 40s and 50s, that risk of breast cancer was like 30% compared to sort of like 80% in modern day America. So what's the difference? Even though you have the same genes, what's the difference between those two situations? And it comes down to the lifestyle. So the point about cancer is that cancer is like a seed. So if you have the genetics, you have the propensity to develop cancer. And this seed of cancer actually exists in all of our cells, and actually not just all our cells, but in all multicellular animals have that sort of seed of cancer. So what's important then is you can't do anything about the seed, but what you can do something about is the soil, which is that if you provide a fertile sort of soil for that seed to germinate, then you are going to increase your risk of developing this cancer. And cancer is not a rare disease. I mean, it affects like 1 in 10 of us, 1 in 8 of us, something like that. So it's something that we really have to think about as we live longer, because it is one of these really important things.
And it sounds like, in the next 30 to 60 years, if we don't figure out how to reverse this or solve this, or I guess create bad soil for the seed of cancer by creating healthy habits in other ways, it seems like this is going to accelerate, where it was 30%, I guess, 20, 30 years ago or 50 years ago now, and now it's 80%, I guess. It's going to be even more in 20 to 30 years, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the trend is very clear, because if you look at the biggest killers of Americans, it's always been heart disease and cancer. So if you go back sort of to the 70s, so 50 years ago, you look at heart disease, number one killer of Americans. That's heart attacks, strokes, that kind of thing. Cancer was a fairly distant second. But the rate of death from heart disease has been improving very, very quickly. And the rate of improvement for cancer has been improving very, very, very slowly.
Why is that?
It's because cancer is a very complex disease, and the way we think about cancer, we just don't know what it is. So for such a common disease, it's a total mystery why we get this cancer. Because if you think about it, it doesn't make any sense for cancer to develop, because it's actually part of us. That is, if you develop breast cancer or colon cancer, for example, that cancer cell was initially derived from our own natural cells. So why would it want to do this? That is, if you get cancer, then the cancer grows and then it kills you and it kills itself in
It kills, yeah.
So why would this sort of thing ever develop? It doesn't make any sense from a sort of that looking at it that way. But
Because most diseases want to spread, but they want to stay alive.
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Like the coronavirus doesn't want to kill you necessarily. It wants to be able to spread to infect other people.
Exactly. And if you sort of bystander, it just kills you, along the way. But that's not its primary purpose. So the point about cancer is that we have never sort of understood what this is as a disease. That is, if you look at heart disease is caused by blockages in arteries. So we develop all kinds of things. So we develop drugs, we develop blood thinners, we develop, you go in and you use a balloon to open up the artery. You develop new technologies such as imaging technologies. You develop ways to monitor patients. So because you know what causes it. Because if you don't know what causes something, it's really hard to fix. Like if you have a car and all you hear is a random clank and you don't know what the clanking is from, it's really hard to fix it. Same thing with diseases. If you have a disease like COVID, for example, and you know it's a virus, well, now at least you have somewhere that you can start. That is, okay, it's a virus, let's develop a vaccine or let's develop some antiviral drug. But if you have no idea what this disease actually is, then you have nowhere to go. So that's what I talk about is how we think about cancer, the paradigm of cancer as a disease, what causes it. You have to first understand what it is. And that's been the real mystery. The medical mystery is, what is cancer? And the way we look at cancer has changed significantly over the last 10 years. Right. And most people don't even understand that. So it's a very interesting story from that standpoint.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned, the heart disease. I saw Dr. Stephen Gundry, who endorsed the back of your cancer code book, and he's been on my show a few times. And he's a guy who did 10,000 heart surgeries and realized that like the things that he was doing on the surface level to create temporary relief, people were coming back in because they weren't solving the root problem, which was a lot of it around diet and lifestyle. And that's what I'm hearing you say, is that diet is a massive contributor to cultivating the seed of cancer to grow and flourish with the wrong types of diet. Is it possible in your mind to reverse cancer by the right diet and by fasting, which is something you talk about a lot?
Oh, yeah, because the thing is that once you have the cancer, it's really hard, because that's sort of like, if you don't change the oil in your car, then your car breaks down. Then you say, oh, I'm going to start changing the oil in my car. Well, yeah, that's good, but you need, a lot more than that. It's the same thing. Once you actually develop the cancer, then it's really hard to fix from a diet standpoint. You really need the drugs that we've spent, millions and billions of dollars developing over these last 30 years. But in terms of preventing cancer, there's actually no reason why you couldn't, because you can look at sort of people who live in a traditional society, for example. So you can take a look at, say, the Inuit or the American Indians sort of before sort of they became westernized. Or you can look at the African people before they were sort of assimilated into a Western culture. And interestingly, those peoples were actually considered, some of them were considered immune to cancer. There was so little cancer that they thought that the Inuit, for example, or what used to be called the Eskimos, actually could not get cancer. So the university, Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, they used to send an expedition up to the Arctic Circle every year to study why these Inuit couldn't get cancer. Of course, as they became westernized and started eating, sugar and white flour, then they started getting all the same cancers that we did. In Africa, for example, this fellow by the name of Denis Burkitt, who is a sort of a missionary and doctor, when he got down there, he's like, wow, he was like, look at the difference. The people who live traditionally in Africa get no cancer, no colon cancer. But the minute they transition to a Western style civilization with their foods, with the whole thing, they actually start to get cancer. You don't find cancer when that. So it was called actually a disease of civilization. So all of these diseases, obesity, diabetes, and cancer, were not found in people living traditionally. So the point is, not that, one is that they didn't live as long, but the point is that if you can find and understand what makes it, protective from them, why the soil, like we all have the seed, but the soil was different. what it is about that, if we can understand that, then you can reduce your risk substantially to the point where your risk is very low. Again, as an example, if you take a Japanese or Chinese woman from Japan or from Shanghai and you move them to San Francisco, within a couple of generations, the risk of breast cancer approximately tripled.
Crazy.
So it's crazy, exactly. But that's great hope. Because
if you know the root of it, then you can go back to a different way of living.
Exactly. Because if you can, and remember, Shanghai and Japan and so on, they're modern societies. So if you can understand what it is about the diet, about the lifestyle that's so important, you could actually take that woman in San Francisco and reduce her risk of breast cancer by a third. So that's very, very powerful knowledge.
So what would you say are the 5 foods we must eliminate to support us in preventing cancer? What are those 5 key things you're like, oh man, if you can get rid of as much of this as possible, it's going to really support your chances?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And it's sort of sugar is probably one of the very, very important things that we really need to lower because that really supports it. And it gets to how cancer develops. A lot of the refined foods and people talk, and the most that we eat, like the one thing we eat more than anything else tends to be refined carbohydrates. So, white bread and that kind of thing. That's probably the most important thing is the sugar and refined grains. Refined anything is probably bad for you. So, even if you're not talking about carbohydrates, but refined, say, oils, you should eat natural oils, like eat foods that are sort of in the natural state, and refined meats, like eating bologna, for example. People talk about meat all the time, but it's like there's a big difference between bologna and grass finished beef sort of thing. There's a huge difference because one is jam packed full of chemicals and other crap, and one is just beef, right? And people have been eating beef for thousands of years. So those refined foods, so refined carb, but also refined fats and refined proteins, probably those play a decent role, although the evidence is lower. And then the other thing that is really important, the 5th thing that's probably very important, is likely the frequency that we eat. That is, eating all the time provides that sort of fertile soil. So to understand why this is, you have to get back to sort of how cancer develops. So you have to understand that cancer almost evolves almost as a separate species from us. So when you have a breast cancer cell, for example, it originated from a normal breast cell, but after it evolves, it grows or it doesn't grow depending on growth factors. And it's almost a separate species from us. That is, it will grow and it won't. The normal breast cell or a normal lung cell, they will do everything to, play on the team, right? So they're always supporting the body. You're a team player. Those cancer cells are not team players. Basically, they're out for themselves. So they will grow. And
it's the enemy coming to attack you.
That's right. It's like the guy who's just trying to pad his stats,
Right.
It's like, you should have passed. It's like, but that's the point, that this cancer cell now is only interested in its own survival. That is, it will grow, and it will grow at the expense of its neighbors. So it will keep growing and it will destroy everything around it. So it will move around, for example. So a breast cancer cell will move around the body. And that's not for the good of the whole body, right? It's for the good of itself. It's trying to spread itself around. So you got to realize that the cancer cell responds as a foreign organism. And it sounds very strange to say, okay, we have this foreign organism, almost like an infection in us, but that's actually how our body sees that cancer. That is, our immune system actually detects, is a very powerful, it kills stuff, but it's very powerful. So it has to be reined in because you don't want it destroying, normal parts of the body. So it recognizes certain cells as foreign and certain cells as self. And cancers are actually innately seen as foreign cells. So it is a foreign invader almost that has evolved from us. But during the development of this cancer, it will grow or not grow depending on growth signals. So our body has certain nutrient sensors. So nutrient sensors tells our body when food is available. So when you eat, certain hormones like insulin and mTOR will go up. And that tells our body that food is available, we should grow, right? Because you don't want your cells to grow when there's no food, right? It's just natural.
Mm-hmm.
If there's no food, you got to get rid of some of those extraneous cells. So if you're eating all the time and you're always activating these nutrient sensors, you're actually telling your body, grow, 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 grow. So if you eat 6-8 times a day, you're telling your body, your cells in your body, grow, 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 grow. If you eat fewer times, like 3 times a day, or you do intermittent fasting, if you don't eat at all, what you're going to do is shut down those growth signals, and this cancer will have a more difficult time to grow. So if you grow breast cancer cells in the lab, for example, you can't do it without insulin. It will actually wither up and die. So therefore, if you know that, then you can say, well, and that's one of the secrets
And insulin comes from eating any food, or is this only sugar?
It's carbohydrates and protein. So, but the nutrient sensors come from different foods. So different foods will activate different nutrient sensors. But the point is that if you don't eat, like fasting, for example, one is you're going to lower your insulin levels, which will lower the overall growth signaling in our body, which is a good thing for adults. And adults' growth is not good. Generally, you stay the same size. You don't want to be growing too much because the growth, a high growth environment, of course, lets the cancer sort of grow out of control. And that was the secret to why vitamins, for example, was not a good thing, because it's basically growth. It supports growth of cells. And what they found in a lot of studies was when they gave people these vitamin supplements, they actually got more cancer. They didn't get less cancer, they got more cancer. So in fact, it's just like if you spread fertilizer on an empty field. You want the grass to grow, but what grows are a bunch of weeds because you've put down all this growth signaling stuff. So therefore, all you get is the weeds. Same with the body.
Are supplements and vitamins bad for us then?
There's no evidence that it's really bad for you. When you give high doses in these studies, you do get certain ones. So folic acid, for example, and beta carotene, which is a precursor to vitamin A. And those 2 studies, there was actually a suggestion that you actually get more cancer from them. Because in our current situation in North America, most of us are not vitamin deficient. Most of us actually have too much. You actually want to slow down the growth.
Really?
And this is why obesity and type 2 diabetes are so intimately linked with cancer, is because both conditions are conditions where we have too much insulin in our body.
So we want to lower insulin overall, because insulin is one of the main causes of the fertilizer for cancer to potentially grow.
Exactly. And there's several ways to do that. One is to change either the foods that you eat, and that is the sugar, for example, the refined carbohydrates that make up the bulk of our diet. And the other thing is to change the frequency with which you eat, because you can affect both things. So just like if you're, for example, to pay, $10 and you pay it every day, it adds up quickly, right? If you have a coffee every day and it's like, $5 or $7 at Starbucks, every day, it adds up. So just like that, it's not just the amount that you're paying, which is not much, but it's the frequency, right? Same thing with the foods. It's not just the amount that you eat or what it is that you eat, it's how often you eat it. So if you're eating now 6-8 times a day, well, that's a lot worse if you ate once a day, right? That's just basic math. Like you can't get around that. And the problem is, of course, that if you look at how people eat today compared to sort of 1970, it's very different. So in 1970, people ate 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. No snacks. Nobody ate snacks back then.
Now it's a snack culture, like snacking all day.
Exactly. And people say it's good for you. People say, oh, you should eat multiple times in the day, 6 times a day. It's good for you. But nobody in the history of humanity has done that before, because we had work to do, right? It's not like your great grandparents, working in the factory, they're taking off every 2 hours to make themselves a little, ham sandwich or something, right? It was like, there's work to do. You eat when you have time. So, in the 70s, it's funny because I always say you have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that was it. if you wanted an after school snack, your mom said, no, you're going to ruin your dinner. And if you wanted a bedtime snack, she would have said, no, you should have ate more at dinner, right? And
right. You should have finished your meal.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the point. And nobody ate not a lot of desserts and all that. Nowadays, of course, when you look at the studies, people are eating 5-6 times a day. You even look at schools. It's like, they're going to have breakfast. Then they're going to have a mid-morning snack. Then they're going to have lunch. Then they're going to have an after-school snack. Then they're going to eat dinner. And then if they play soccer, in between the halves of soccer, parents think that you need to feed them like cookies. It's like, okay, well, I played soccer growing up and nobody chased me around with a bunch of cookies. We had a great time, right?
Exactly.
We didn't need it, right? But that's 6 times a day, every single day. And it's ingrained into us. A few years ago when my son was, going on a trip or something, the school said, well, you should pack him 2 snacks. I'm like, why? Why would you want to give him a bunch of snacks? Like, they're not good for you.
We look at the root causes of disease, and there are many, right? There's environment, there's lifestyle, there's genetics, all affect these various systems in your body, right? But by far, the biggest cause is food. Really? By far. And it affects, what's amazing is it's not just like a little bit.